I think it was years ago, way in the beginning, when I'll say awakened to this. I think I only dreamed of being able to reach an audience like this with this message. And so I really thank you for inviting me today. What I want to do, just a quick outline, is I want to give you the background, where I'm coming from, so you know the story, so and hopefully see what I call the golden thread that connects my history to my current self and what I do. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to share my screen. I just want to again say that as I was preparing for giving this talk today, I came across some old predictions that the angels gave me. Back in 1990, this one: we will zoom enlightenment to you and to others who are and will be coming to the path. I just thought that was really cute because back in that day, we didn't have the term Zoom yet. In fact, I started all of this way before internet, as you will see as the story goes. 3 pictures of me in my life. Okay, I have this theory that before we come here, we're in a conference room with all our angels and our significant other people who will be in our life with us, our mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, and we make a plan for coming here. I believe it's Earth School. We come here to learn lessons. And then when the plan is set and everybody chooses their role, poof, we come into the earth, and here we are. But as we come here, we like fall through the different planes and come through this veil of forgetfulness, and we forget that plan. So here we are. I am certain that I did not want to come here. And I jokingly tell Steve that I was so scared, I pushed him, I said, "You first." And what tells me that is he was born on October 23rd, 1948. Sorry, Steve, giving your birthday. And I came in exactly 2 years and 2 days later. So I think we were supposed to be twins, but I chickened out. When I got here, within a few days, my mother told me this story once. I became very sick. I was hospitalized and not expected to live. And in the confusion, the doctor and the minister both baptized me so that I would be saved. That was, I believe, my first near-death experience at about a week old. This is the earliest picture of me that I could find. A recurring theme in my life was I was always trying to escape. Again, I never wanted to be here, didn't want to stay here, and I wanted to get out of here. And my earliest memory is Steve letting me out of my playpen to free me. Just some key points that shaped me growing up is I was raised a strict Lutheran. I couldn't be a Girl Scout. I couldn't pray with non-Lutherans. In fact, hang with anybody that didn't go to my church. Anybody that didn't go to our church was going to hell. One of the first messages I received from that minister in his preaching was that I was a sinner and that I needed to be afraid of God. And he was out to get me. After confirmation, I stopped going to church. I thought, I don't need to listen to this. And I'd hide in my room until my parents would leave for church on Sunday morning. One day, the minister came back home with them to talk to me. And he ended up shaking his finger in my face and said, "If you're not in church next Sunday, young lady, you're going to hell." I don't know at what age I said to myself, well, then I might as well earn it. At about age 14, I had my first drunk. At about age 17, I believe it was, I had an emergency appendectomy and my second near-death experience. In the recovery room after the surgery, the doctor scolded me, shook his finger in my face, and scolded me for not getting to the hospital sooner, that they almost lost me. While in recovery, I had dreams of being on the other side, and perhaps even during the surgery, although I don't have a clear memory of that. But these visitation dreams, what I call visitation dreams, I had periodically after that and to this day, of being on the other side and viewing life here viewing myself here. During or right after the surgery, I saw myself laying in my coffin, dead, and people mourning around me. I mean, it was really that close. Soon after that second NDE, I had a sudden and keen interest in all things spiritual, and I dabbled with the occult. When in my first apartment, I began experiments with the Ouija board. And one night, an apparition appeared. This black object out of nowhere fell at a curve and kind of screamed at the same time, and it freaked everybody out. And that was kind of the end of the Ouija board experiments. I was still fascinated with it, however. And life went on, and so did my drinking. I want to pause to just bring in my career choice was interior design. And at about 18 or 19, I moved to Milwaukee. I live about 100 miles north of Milwaukee in Wisconsin. I moved to Milwaukee to go to school for design, and I was hired as an assistant to one of the top designers in Milwaukee. This is a picture of him and I on this slide. I made it, I thought. I made it. I worked in the field of my dreams and was working in the field for a while, but something was missing and I could not figure it out. It was not totally satisfying or fulfilling to me. I eventually, because of the drinking, I got out of that field and became a clerk at Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company. Milwaukee is known for its beer. And I ended up working there, and then my drinking really kind of took off at that point again. And I'll pick up this thread later. There's another picture of Steve and I. I've always looked up to him as my big brother and partner in crime, I guess you could say. And here we are in Milwaukee in about 1970 at the Botanical Gardens. I had basically become a hippie. I had a long fringe jacket on. My drinking progressed for about 17 years. It was my way of life. It was my way to escape. Everything I did involved alcohol. I was in and out of relationships. I was married, I miscarried, I divorced. I was fired from a job or two, never had any money. And in April of '84, I was arrested for drunk driving. You'd think that would wake me up. And I never stopped thinking about that, what that minister said. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had gone to hell. Then one bright sunny morning in November 29th, 1984, I woke up and I couldn't get out of bed. When I finally got to the mirror, I was yellow and I couldn't recognize myself. It scared me to death. And it was the day that I called the doctor and got myself into treatment. Now, I'm not going to hear your laughter, but this to me is the funniest thing of my life. I was admitted to none other than Lutheran Hospital in Milwaukee. I thought God has a sense of humor. So I was 34, hospitalized with acute alcoholism and given 1 to 5 years if I didn't quit. I felt like I had no choice. My drinking life was over, and now my life was over because it was everything that I knew. I didn't know it at the time, but AA was a blessing to turn me around. And my life had completely changed due to being in AA and learning about spirituality, and maybe perhaps there's a loving God. One of the books I read at that time amazed me, and I completely related to it. It's the story of Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and how he had this spiritual experience and channeled the 12 steps of AA, channeled them. And the story, if you want to read it, it's fascinating. It's Pass It On, the story of Bill Wilson and how the AA message reached the world. It was about April '85. I was in recovery for about 6 months, I think. Or I'm guessing because it's kind of a blur. When I met Jerry at an AA meeting, it was an immediate, I know you from somewhere attraction, love at first sight, soulmate. and we were seldom apart for the next year and a half. Jerry shared such things with me as seeing the Christ light in his bedroom. So he would share his spiritual experiences with me as well. First, I thought he was maybe crazy. Later, I learned that he wasn't. On October 25th, 1986, was my 36th birthday. He and I were celebrating my birthday. And 3 weeks later, on November 18th, he died. Whenever I tell this story, tears continue to come. So excuse me for just a moment. I could tell you a million things that happened that day, and probably things that you'd be interested in. Steve wanted me to keep this short. But that day I remember screaming at God, if there was a God that cared about me, help me through this, alive and sober, and I will help others so they don't have to suffer. I never prayed so hard in my life. I immediately heard a voice say, "This is not the end, dearest Nancy, it's just the beginning." I turned to look to see who said it. No one's there, I'm alone. And then it went on to say things like, "We had to bend near the earth to save you. You were so sad. And now that we have your attention, our work together can begin." That came a little bit later. But when I first started hearing this inner voice, I thought I'd lost my mind. Because, you know, when you hear voices, you're crazy. At an AA meeting soon after, this pamphlet absolutely flew off a shelf at me. It cost me 35 cents. And it was called Grief, How to Live with Sorrow. And there are a couple of, I took a picture of it and put it in this presentation because I hung on to this book for dear life. And I learned things I learned things from it that for somehow, some way, I would understand why this happened, and that God loved me so much that he wouldn't let anything happen to me that weren't for my own good. And underlined here, I have, there is a good reason why my loving God has allowed this to happen. Someday he will make it known to me, but until then, I ask him to sustain me. And that's literally the fuel in my tank for the next period of time, and maybe still is. There was something stirring deep inside of me during this time period. Somehow I knew his death had to happen. What did that mean, though? Somehow I knew this was all supposed to play out, like from that pre-birth plan. But I also didn't know how or why I knew this. It was just this inner, wisdom coming through. But looking back on it, something had to awaken me from my stupor. AA had started to do that, and now the death of my fiancé was like a deeper awakening. And I have to say that one amazing thing after another happened following his death and the funeral, even during the funeral. And one of those things was Steve would always send me a book. Whenever something was going on in my life, he'd send me a book. And now he's the book reviewer for The Inner Voice. And one of the books he sent me at this point was Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. And I have to say that this book started to change my life. It was the first time I heard that we create our own reality through our thoughts and beliefs. And in that way, you don't have to blame God for doing it to you, or that you have the power to, if you created it, you can recreate it the way you want it to be. I could change and I could heal, and that was really good news to me. This book, okay, so I went to a Unity church to speak with a minister to get some grief counseling. And I had a session with him, and afterward we walked into the bookstore, and he's told me to choose any book I wanted. And this book, Life Never Ends by Kay Leedy, fell off the shelf. He bent over, picked it up, and handed it to me, and he said, "I think somebody wants you to have this." It was a book about how husband died, and she was channeling messages from him about heaven and what life was like there. I read it in one sitting. It was like I needed to know what happened to Jerry. Where is he? What's he doing? What's life like there? It's like I'd never thought about heaven and dying before this. I was only 34. I thought I'd had years to think about this stuff before I died. It wasn't maybe about a week later that I accidentally, by pure coincidence, met a psychic. She ended up giving me a reading and told me that Jerry wanted to communicate through automatic writing. And I had just read that in Kay Leedy's book, but I didn't think I had the skill or the ability to do that. But here the psychic was telling me I needed to do it. Jerry and I needed to say our goodbyes. Also, what was going on at the same time, and there is much overlap in my story, and I can't just deliver it one thing after the next, sorry. It's a blend. While I was at Unity, I learned that they had A Course in Miracles classes on Monday nights, and I went because I needed a miracle. And ultimately, I needed to change my thinking around and heal my life. And some of the key points I remember learning right away was everything is a lesson God would have me learn. Miracles are examples of right thinking, and I was into this wrong thinking. A happy outcome to all things is sure. The Holy Spirit is the highest communication medium. Miracles enable you to heal the sick and raise the dead because you made both sickness and death and can abolish both. And my home awaits my happy return, or my glad return. I studied the Course in Miracles for the next 17 years, at least. I'm still reading it. Back to when I met the psychic, and she told me that I needed to do automatic writing to channel Jerry and get messages. These were the simple instructions she gave me, and I kind of set the scene for you. 3 o'clock in the morning, a bouquet of white flowers. I chose roses. Light a candle. Amethyst crystal helps in the communication. Pen and paper. Say certain prayers. State my intention. Be quiet. Listen. And write what you hear. I went on I went on after a while and am teaching this to people. I'll get to that in just a minute. That very first morning, June 7, 1987, at 3 o'clock in the morning until 4:30 a.m., this was my first automatic writing. A little bit of gibberish and the word welcome. And at the bottom, there was an X. And Jerry always signed notes to me with an X, meaning hug and kiss. This next section of my talk is about the writing and how it evolved over time. At first, it was a bunch of, I had to teach myself this. I had to teach myself the process of how to listen, how to write, how to hold the pen, how to not hold the pen, and adjust the energy too at the same time. And during this process, sometime during the process, Jerry came through. I can't say he came through first, except for that first message. But then the angels were coming through. I wasn't aware of this. I didn't know that until later. But there would be this doodling and trying to just feel the energy and get the words out. I would hear the words and write them kind of at the same time later as the handwriting would evolve. And on the side, I can't point to it, but in the margin of the page, you see little writing. Those were questions I asked, and then the large writing would be the automatic writing answering my questions. And I just threw a bunch of these in here just to show you samples. And depending on who was talking, the handwriting would change. And sometimes if I had trouble reading it, I would go back and write the words underneath the words that were written. That's what you see on the far right. I saved everything. I saved it in this 3-ring binder. A lot of my messages early on were, love yourself more. I thought if I hear that one more time, but that was the main message. It's like, apparently, I didn't love myself very much, and I needed to up my game. Finally, it got to where I knew the process, maybe like in a month or two, I don't remember, but kind of, I think it took maybe about a month or two, that Jerry could come through with a handwriting that was fairly legible. The T's weren't crossed, the periods weren't there. That meant picking up the pen and setting it back down, different motion. And I taught myself how to do that later. But what's interesting to me is on the left, you see this happy birthday card and Jerry's handwriting beneath it and his XOXOs. And the page on the right is his writing to me through automatic writing. And you can see the similarity in the handwriting. This all made me very excited when this all happened. We were able to finalize what we needed to finalize and say our goodbyes. Sometime during this process, the angels came in. And I believe that they guided the whole thing, but they didn't like introduce themselves until during the process at some point. And the handwriting eventually evolved to kind of a normal handwriting, as you see on this page. And at some point, Sreper, S-R-E-P-E-R, the angel that talked to me, signed his name as Sreper, Angel of the Great White Light. And that signature came on every reading after that. And I kind of stopped right there and I thought, well, it figures I'd get a name like Sreper. Who's that? What? Can't I have a normal angel like Michael or Raphael or Gabriel? And it was years later that, and actually not too long ago, just a couple of years ago, that Sreper finally revealed to me that he was Archangel Michael. But had he told me that in the beginning, I would have mishandled that information. I would have either been boastful about it or wouldn't believe it, that why is an archangel talking to me? And so they didn't reveal it until later when I could handle it. I still use Sreper though, because the name is very endearing to me. This is just the binder where I keep all the readings. Okay, now, so what, right? Now what do I do? An angel's talking to me. Do I shout it from the rooftops? How do I let people know? Remember my promise, I wanted to help people, and how do I get the word out? I didn't know it, but I think the angels had it all figured out. And they were just waiting for me to say, I'm ready. The next thing that happened, kind of right around the same time period of me starting at the Course in Miracles, I met Joanne. She was a holistic faith healer who believed in miracles. I met her at the Course in Miracles. And I felt safe to share it with her privately. I said, you know what? An angel's talking to me. And she said, I've been looking for somebody with your ability. I've got clients I can't communicate with. I don't know exactly what's the matter or what to do for them. Would you please ask your angels what I can do for them? One of the stories was a 5-year-old boy, I'll call Mark, who was diagnosed by the Mayo Clinic as autistic with an intellectual disability, meaning he didn't talk. His only behavior was running through the house screaming, or he'd stand facing the wall, not saying anything. I did a reading for Joanne. She went to visit the family, saw progress. She came back a couple of 2-3 times where I did a series of readings, and it involved the family. It was a past life connection with the family members that was the cause of his autism. And as she worked on him and as the angels revealed the information, he was healed. He was in regular school by the age he was 5 or 6. He had some catching up to do. but he was normal after that. I lost track of the family because I really didn't know the family myself personally, but they were lost. And recently, maybe a year or two ago, I looked for his name. He has an unusual name on Facebook and found this picture of him. He's married. He graduated college, married, and has a child of his own. So he was definitely healed with that information. Another story quickly. Joanne's own son died in a house fire at age 19. The message from the angels healed her grief rather quickly. She had me deliver a message from Terry at his funeral. He also told her he wanted to write a book with her, and he channeled a book of information to her from the other side, and it's called Messages from Heaven by Joanne Bauman. The third story I want to share is a fascinating story. Karen was a teenager who was on her deathbed in the ICU at a Milwaukee hospital in desperate need of a bone marrow transplant. And they were frantically searching for the right donor. It made news, and I saved the very yellow newspaper clipping of this search for her. Meanwhile, the mother learned about Joanne, and Joanne called me for a reading, and took the reading with her to the hospital to work on Karen on her deathbed. This was the Monday before Easter that year. The angels instructed her what to do. The image on the right is a typed out reading. At this point now, I'm typing readings. Still no internet, still no computers. And she took the reading with her, and it guided her to heal Karen of this disease on her deathbed. Okay, 4 days later, the Friday before Easter, she walked out of the hospital in remission. And a couple of years ago, when I was updating my book, I wanted to include this story. In 2021, I believe, I asked Joanne about Karen, and Karen was still in remission. So I wanted to share that story with you. Okay, so what about the inner voice, right? I was so moved by these stories that I needed to do something to share them. Now, back in 1991, the internet wasn't here yet. I didn't have a computer. How was I going to share these stories? I didn't have a computer. I had this old clunky typewriter that was clunkier looking than that. No publishing skills, and I had no money to start such a venture. But I wanted to keep my promise. And I wanted to spread the news of these stories because they would help people. They were helping me. So I collected articles and started writing a column called Angel Talk. Joanne's column was eventually called Miracles I've Seen. The very first issue, I drove down to Chicago where Steve lived. He borrowed a friend's computer, this little Mac that you see pictured, and we created the first issue of the Inner Voice. It was dated January 1993. It was 16 pages. We overnight Xeroxed it at a Kinko's. Remember those, Kinko's? And I directly mailed to about 200 people, if I knew 200 people. And the rest were delivered to various drop points in Milwaukee to start getting the word out. I soon learned a lot goes into publishing. I had all kinds of programs to learn. And the growth of the magazine was it went into print right away, newsprint right away. It was taken to a printer 80 miles from where I lived. And then I went back in a pickup truck and picked up the bundles when they were ready and hand delivered them to the stores. The picture on the far left is my very first Mac that the money was loaned to me to start the magazine. A very good friend who is now our editor loaned me the money to buy that. Steve came from Chicago and set it up. I lived in Cedarburg, Wisconsin, which was about just north of Milwaukee, a suburb. The middle picture is me in my office in '93, and Steve and I in his office in California around 2000. Here's some of the very first issues of the magazine. It magically opened doors and opened hearts. Steve started a radio show where he was interviewing people like Neil Donald Walsh, Larry Dossey, some of these big name movers and shakers of the time. And he and I had the honor and the privilege of interviewing Ruth Montgomery. Remember her? Author of several books. She was a Washington Post reporter and went to some seances by Arthur Ford in Washington, D.C. to debunk them. And she ended up being a believer. And we interviewed her in Minneapolis in, I think, maybe 95 or 96. And that was a thrill. And I also learned some of the automatic writing tips from her books. Louise Hay, the founder of Hay House Publishers, I went to one of her talks. I'm not sure what happened first, if she was sending me her column, Dear Louise, for the magazine, or if I met her at a conference first. I don't remember. But I did carry her column and interviewed her over the phone one time. And at the end of the conversation, she was telling me about her garden. I asked her about her garden, which was her latest passion. And I said, oh, it sounds beautiful. I'd love to see it. And she said, seriously, come on out to my house and interview me here. So she invited me to her home in California. And that was a huge honor to meet her and be in that. And like I say, I carried her interviews and the doors opened. I mean, we just met all kinds of people doing this work. And I'm so grateful that we were able to give people the exposure in order to help other people. I got some notoriety at the time too. In the year 2000, I went on a cross-country tour teaching my You Can Talk with Your Angels workshops and got some write-ups. This one I thought was kind of cute. Woman says angel led her through grief. Another write-up was Cedarburg publisher believes in miracles. This real quick is just kind of outlines the projects and the places that occurred to me during that time period. I opened up a Miracles Institute in Palm Springs, California, as an extension of Joanne's business. And since 2012, the Inner Voice magazine has been published monthly online. Again, here is Louise Hay and I meeting in 94 or 95. I guess I got a little ahead of myself before. Another key piece in my life, the thread that I'm picking up later, is the interior design work that I did, and I always felt something was missing. It was feng shui. It's a study of how energy moves through a space and how that affects us, and how the things that we live with and the order that things are in affect us. And while I was at Louise's house, I met Tara, Catherine Collins, who had just written this book, The Western Guide to Feng Shui. She handed me an autographed copy of it. And that's when I first heard about this, I guess, phenomena of feng shui and how that affects us. A few years later, I had the good fortune of living in California, and I took her course in San Diego and became certified consultant in feng shui. Other people that were key in the Inner Voice and my life, Meredith Young Sowers. Some of you might know her as Meredith Lady Young, author of Agartha. And she's also created the angelic messenger cards that I know a lot of people use. And she's author of several other books too. Also met, and she's still friends with me today. I've been to her house. She's been to mine. I've brought her in for workshops. Timothy Wiley, who is now deceased, he's the author of Dolphin Myths and Whispers or something. I'm not sure the name offhand. Several of the adventures with angels and ETs. I'm forgetting the name of his books right off the top of my head. But I met him and brought him in for workshops in California, then to his house. And I think I said he is now deceased. He died a couple of years ago. This was fun, and this one's for you, Wendy, I heard. I met Judy Guggenheim on that tour in 2000, going across the country. She invited me to do a workshop at her home, and also I did feng shui on her home. And we became friends. I've since lost track of her, unfortunately. I don't know where she is, but she was one of the people who really influenced me at that time. Pictured here is the tour bus that I lived in for like 2 years. And that's a copy of the cover of my old book. So it was around 2012 that I intuitively knew, somehow got the message that I could do this on the internet, that technology had caught up somehow and I could do the magazine on the internet. And this is the premier issue on the internet. And I still gather all the articles. I design the magazine. I do the typesetting. What else do? I do everything. And when the file is complete, I send it to Steve and he prepares it for the internet. And he takes care of the website. And he also writes a column, a book review of some book on the afterlife or the other side. I'm sure you probably have all seen that by now, hopefully. If not, he also posts the reviews on a page on the innervoicemagazine.com website. So you can still read the reviews and the back issues. And here's just like a smattering of some of the issues in the past few years. Always art on the cover, always something inspirational inside, all in the order of inspiration for healing body, mind, spirit, heart, and home. It's been a lot of work, but it's also been like my life's work, part of that original plan. And it's also my greatest joy to do this. The current issue is this one. It's up on the website right now. As a result of doing all of these readings, and with that urge and that drive to share and help other people, I rewrote my book, and it came out last year, Angel Guidance, Wisdom for Navigating Life's Challenges. It's available on Amazon in paperback or Kindle. And what it is that it's a collection of snippets of readings over the years. And people ask questions. That, by the way, is how the angels answer. We ask a question, they answer. And it's listed alphabetically by subject matter. So you can just look up a topic and see what the angels say about it. Or you can just open the book anywhere. The angels say that whatever you read can be applied to your situation. And it's always to help us change our mind, give us that right thinking, and see a miracle and live a better life. Hopefully in June, I'm coming out with You Can Talk with Your Angels, and that is a book on the method that I do. and as a result of all the classes I've given, so it's some of the students' comments and questions as well that are answered in this book. So that'll be a lot of fun if you want to teach yourself how to do this. And finally, here are the links. I think Steve might have been putting links up in the chat during the talk. So that's it. I am located in Neenah, Wisconsin. I'm in Central Time Zone, so it's like, what, 3 o'clock now? And I want to end where I started. We're zooming enlightenment around the world, just like the angel said back in 1990. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention and for listening.